When it comes to horror cinema, remakes have a nasty habit of diluting the essence of what made the original so effective in favour of cheap and marketable thrills. Nevertheless, there is still a vast assortment of equally excellent horror remakes that have somehow managed to slip under most of our radars. Though these flicks may not necessarily be superior to the original, all these films do have something to offer. I'm Till from What Culture Horror, and these are 10 hidden gem horror remakes you need to watch. Number 10. We Are What We Are, 2013. Cannibal horror flicks are a whole beast of their own within the world of horror, with Cannibal Holocaust, Texas Chainsaw, and The Hills Have Eyes being the quintessential examples of the subgenre. Typically, these films revel in their stomach-churning gore and taboo subject matter, which is what made the Mexican horror We Are What We Are stand out from the crowd. Unlike its peers, this film was far more subdued in its violence. Rather, it anchored itself around the central family dynamic to tell a more grounded story as we watch a younger generation forced to continue the family's cannibalistic traditions. The American remake of the same name likewise focused on the human aspects of the story when sisters Rose and Iris are tasked with preparing for a family feast after the unexpected death of their mother. Unlike the original, this version takes things in interesting new directions. By shifting the setting to the dreary Catskills, the remake has an American Gothic flavour coloured by the dreary blues and greys of its rainy setting, which it uses to full advantage to explore themes of religion, patriarchy, and female empowerment. This version is a distinctly American horror story. Number 9. Silent House, 2011. Starring Elizabeth Olsen as high school student Sarah, Silent House, which comes to us from the filmmaking duo behind Open Water, sees the youngster visit her father during the summer where they plan to renovate a lavish country home. Since this is a horror film set in the woods though, nothing is going to end well for Sarah and her family. She soon finds herself under attack by unknown perpetrators and must find a way to escape while remaining out of sight. Keeping the tension at a razor-sharp pitch throughout the entirety of this flick, Silent Hill's party piece is that unlike the Uruguayan original, it's presented as one continuous shot. By keeping the camera tightly glued to Olsen, the eerie hallways feel more claustrophobic than normal. Likewise, by refusing to cut away from the action, we're forced to suffer through every terrifying second of terror as well. A collection of effective set pieces, including a nerve-shattering sequence involving a camera flash, coupled with disturbing revelations, are the icing on top of this hidden gem of a remake. While it doesn't bring anything substantial to the table that the original didn't, this Silent House manages to keep the suspense high. Number 8. The Happiness of the KATAKURIS. Best known for agonizingly violent outings, Audition, Ichi the Killer, and Gozu, prolific Japanese filmmaker Takashi Miike has become a legendary figure within the realms of cult cinema. One of his films that doesn't nearly get as much attention, however, is The Happiness of the KATAKURIS. A madcap musical featuring zombies, bizarre claymation, and hilariously zany sing-along numbers, the plot follows the titular family as they plan to turn a large house near Mount Fuji into a bed and breakfast. The few guests they do receive, however, all seem to end up dead. With the bodies piling up and the truth becoming harder to hide, the family's lives turn into a surreal nightmare. Even if you have seen this film, you may not know it's a remake of the 1998 South Korean horror comedy titled The Quiet Family. Like Miike's film, the original saw a large family settle into a remote home, this time a hiking lodge, in the hopes of turning it into a thriving business, with the few guests they have all meeting unfortunate ends. Though the original played its black comedy premise more seriously, Miike's version throws all logic aside for an outrageously insane time. Number 7. Slumber Party Massacre, 2021. One of the most cherished pieces of exploitation slasher cinema to come out of the 80s, satirical gorefest The Slumber Party Massacre saw a group of half-naked teenagers fall victim to a drill-wielding serial killer. It was unflinching when it came to its violence and self-aware when it came to its campy schlock. And it's this dream combination which led to this film becoming an all-time cult favourite. What you may not be aware of though is that this film recently got a remake in 2021 and was released on the Sci-Fi Channel after making its debut at Fantastic Fest. And while sci-fi horrors are well known for being ridiculous pieces of nonsense in the vein of Sharknado, this remake proved to have plenty of bite for a new generation of slasher fans. Dropping the Slumber Party Massacre takes place 3 decades after the original Rampage and moves the carnage from the suburbs to a lakeside house. It's here a group of friends are planning a sleepover, but in a clever twist, they're planning to put an end to the spree. With all the glorious drill-based butchery you'd expect, this remake is a worthy successor. Number 6. The Town That Dreaded Sundown, 2014. Out of all of the early slasher flicks that came out of the 1970s, none are as underappreciated as Charles B. Pierce's The Town That Dreaded Sundown. A pseudo-documentary slasher, this horror is loosely based on the real-life Moonlight murders which shook the town of Texarkana in the 1940s, with an unidentified killer known as the Phantom attacking 8 people. It's fitting then that the 2014 half-remake, half-sequel occupies a similar level of underappreciation in modern cinema. Dubbing itself as a meta-sequel, this iteration comes to us courtesy of producers Jason Blum and Ryan Murphy. Set in a present-day Texarkana, this film gets off to a brutal start when the masked killer makes his grand return by attacking a young couple who've left a drive-in screening of the original film, leaving the girl alive with the message, "This is for Mary, make them remember." The town is once again awash with panic while the bodies start to pile up. Paying homage to the original while amping up the brutality, this slasher is as violent as it is stylish. However, it's the clever meta approach to the genre which makes this entry worth your time. Number 5. 13 Sins, 2014. Directed by The Last Exorcism's Daniel Stamm and starring Scott Pilgrim's Mark Webber as Everyman Elliot, 13 Sins is a remake of the 2006 Thai dark comedy 13, Game of Death, also known as 13 Beloved. Like the original, this underseen film follows a down-on-their-luck person who's given the opportunity of a lifetime when they're contacted by a mysterious stranger offering them vast sums of money for completing a series of tasks. However, if they fail to complete any of the challenges or tell anyone about the game, everything they've earned thus far will be forfeited. While the game begins with a simple task of swatting a fly then eating it, Elliot's ordeal becomes more intense as the game continues, with later tasks asking him to perform increasingly nefarious actions like severing a man's arm and setting a deadly wire trap across a road. With Webb giving a solid performance throughout, 13 Sins takes the comedic angle of the original and turns it into a bleak reflection of Western culture. Though the moral philosophizing at its core is nothing revolutionary in a post-Saw era, its blend of horror, gallows humor, and thriller nevertheless makes for a wildly entertaining experience. Number 4. Don't Be Afraid of the Dark. With a script co-written by Guillermo del Toro, the visionary filmmaker behind Pan's Labyrinth and The Devil's Backbone, and Matthew Robbins, who'd go on to co-write Crimson Peak, it's incredible that nobody talks about the dark fantasy Don't Be Afraid of the Dark. A remake of the 1973 TV movie of the same name which terrified a young del Toro when he saw it, this sinister fairy tale sees a young girl fall prey to a horde of fairy-like creatures when she releases them from the basement of an old house her father is renovating. Though del Toro handed the reins over to comic book artist Troy Nixey to direct, his fingerprints are nevertheless all over this tale's reimagining. By switching the perspective from a grown woman to a small child this time around, this iteration leaned more into its dark fairy tale aesthetic by playing on the childhood fear of the dark. Hearing the unseen creatures whisper in the shadows made for some creepy moments, while the sinister tooth fairy angle gave the monsters a darkly unique twist. If you were ever afraid of the dark as a child, this film epitomized every reason why you should be. Number 3. Willard, 2003. Before there was Anaconda, Cujo, or Jaws, there was Willard. Originally released in 1971 and based on the book The Rat Man's Notebook, the film saw the titular and lonely 27-year-old befriend a colony of rats in his backyard. However, after constantly rejecting the affections from a brown rat named Ben, the rodent orchestrates its revenge. A sequel titled Ben released 1 year later, which had Michael Jackson sing the theme song. Over 30 years later, Willard returned to our screens in the 2003 remake of the same name. This time starring Crispin Glover in an iconic performance, this retelling was a different kind of film than the original. Whereas the 71 version was brightly shot with a boyish lead, this Willard was gothic and brooding in style, drawing on the likes of Hitchcock's Psycho and The Birds for inspiration. Though the horror centers around a horde of killer rats, Willard is a tragic and heartbreaking tale about a desperately lonely person who finds companionship in the unlikeliest of places. But the real tragedy of this film is its undeserved bomb at the box office, which has resulted in this horror being all but forgotten about. Number 2. Maniac, 2012. Coming to us from the filmmaker behind High Tension, The Hills Have Eyes remake, and Crawl, this version of the 1980 video Nasty of the same name surpassed the original by adding a devilish layer of psychological and body horror amongst the bloody carnage. Unlike the original film, which didn't get a classification in the UK until 2002, the plot follows an introverted loner with a traumatic childhood named Frank, played spectacularly in this version by Elijah Wood, who runs a business restoring mannequins. In his spare time, however, Frank is a serial killer who viciously attacks and scalps women and attaches their hair to his mannequins. Predominantly told from a first-person perspective, this underrated remake has an unsettling voyeuristic quality to it as viewers are forced to watch Frank stalk and brutalise his victims in sickening fashion. However, it's the new character study angle in this version which really amps up the terror. Aided by Wood's arresting performance, this Frank has been left fractured and vulnerable by his trauma, and while he commits depraved acts, there are moments where we can't help but feel sorry for this tortured and disturbed soul. Number 1. The Blob, 1988. When it comes to retellings of classic monster movies, we think of Bram Stoker's Dracula, the aforementioned The Fly, or even the recent Invisible Man. A film that you won't immediately think of, though, is the 1988 version of The Blob. Helmed by Chuck Russell, who was fresh from making A Nightmare on Elm Street 3, this flick followed the same premise of the original, in which a small Californian town falls prey to a gelatinous organism that absorbs and digests anyone in its path. Whereas the 50s B-movie is still an enjoyably silly slice of cinema history, Russell's version was an entirely different breed of gooey monstrosity. Thanks to innovations in practical effects at the time, this blob didn't hold anything back. The death scenes are imaginative and disgusting all at once as we see victims being consumed and digested in graphic detail. Every death is as gross and shocking as the last, and because none of these characters deserve what happened to them, their deaths are made more harrowing. Throw in a dash of delicious dark humour and the blob is a fabulously fun time that doesn't get enough attention. And that's our list. What horror movie remake do you think is a hidden gem? Let us know down in the comment section below. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like and subscribe and swing on by our channel again if you want to catch more creepy content. I've been Till, and this has been What Culture. Thanks for watching, look after yourselves, and until next time.